Lesson 2E, Osmosis and Diffusion. The kinetic molecular theory of matter states that all matter is made up of small particles that are constantly moving. Solid, liquid, or gas, these particles are moving, where gases will have particles that move more quickly and require more space, while liquids and solids have particles that move less and less, so therefore are both denser. This theory explains why it is that when food dye is dropped into water, it doesn't simply sink to the bottom and stay there. Rather, we see the blue spread out through the water until it seems to be evenly distributed throughout the water. This is called diffusion. This animation shows how the yellow solute dissolves in the light blue solvent. We describe the movement of many yellow particles up and out as mass movement or net movement of particles. The end result is a homogeneous solution with the yellow evenly spread throughout the solvent. The particles are still moving around, but there is no longer a mass movement of solutes. We call this final state of the solution as being in dynamic equilibrium. If you have an area of high concentration and an area of low concentration of solute, you are said to have a concentration gradient. In this case, you have a concentration gradient of red molecules on the right moving to the left. For diffusion to occur, all that is required is a concentration gradient and kinetic molecular energy, and the result will be a net movement of particles from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. Diffusion does not require any extra energy input. No ATP is required, so it's described as a passive process. All cells have a cell membrane, and membranes often act as a barrier, especially particles in which they are too large to pass through the pores of the membrane. So what happens if there's a concentration gradient and the solute is too big to fit? Well, it's important to know that if the solute can move, it will diffuse in an attempt to reach an equal distribution. However, if the solute is too large, like the red molecules here, then it will act as a magnet and draw water across to dilute it. When the water moves due to a concentration gradient and there is a membrane preventing diffusion from occurring, we have something called osmosis. For osmosis to occur, there must be a membrane and a concentration gradient. Here we have urea on the right dissolved in water. The membrane prevents the urea from moving, so water moves instead. The urea acts like a magnet or a sponge, drawing water across the membrane. This occurs without the requirement of any input energy, such as ATP, so it is also considered passive transport. If the two solutions across the membrane have the same concentration, they are considered to be isotonic to one another. If the two solutions across the membrane have different concentrations, the one with the higher concentration is deemed hypertonic, and the side with the lower concentration is deemed hypotonic. If we were to place a red blood cell into a hypotonic solution, it will result in water entering the cell, attracted to the solute inside the cell. This will cause the cell to inflate and possibly pop. Popping is also known as lysing. If the same red blood cell were to be placed in a hypertonic solution, water would leave the cell to try to dilute the exterior, causing it to shrivel up or crenate. To recap, diffusion is the movement of solute in a solution from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. It requires a concentration gradient. It uses kinetic molecular theory and kinetic molecular energy. It is considered passive transport because there is no input of energy or no ATP is required. Osmosis is the movement of water across a selectively permeable membrane from an area of low solute concentration to an area of high solute concentration. Again, it requires a concentration gradient, but it also requires a membrane. It is also based on kinetic molecular theory requiring kinetic molecular energy. Again, it does not use any ATP, so it is described as being passive transport as well.